Welcome! In this video we will look at adding and populating a toolbar on a form with the PowerBasic Windows compiler. This is the application we used in our last video to display an HTML form inside a form. What we're going to do today is to add a toolbar to this form and put some buttons on it. So the first thing we need are some icons. Now, I've prepared a couple of icons already, a build icon and a help icon, which we're going to add to the toolbar. If you're interested, the software I use to create these icons is software called IconFX, which I can thoroughly recommend. I'll put a link to the website in the description below. The IconFX are not supporting or paying for this video. I'm just a fan of their products. So how do we add our icons? If we go back to our original code, we can add them as resources. Now, using the resource icon command, we can actually reference the two icons, which in this case are in the root folder of our application. So I need to put a path in. Now, it needs an identifier number for each of these, so we're going to set up a couple of constants to reference these. There we go. Now, having got our two icons in, how do we actually put them on the form? Well, let's look to the form designer, which will bring our form up. Now, at the moment, we only have a small number of controls on it. Now I'm going to move these controls down slightly so we have room to get the toolbar in. And having done that, on our toolkit over at the side here, we're looking for the toolbar control. So if we double click on that, it will put a toolbar up at the top. This tells us how big it's going to be, and we can maneuver the rest of our controls in. Now the icons it's showing here are just for demonstration purposes, just to show you what it will look like. If we double click on the toolbar itself, we can see its properties. Now it does have a number of properties on it. These are interesting ones. It will default to placing the toolbar at the top of your form, but there's also an option to place it at the bottom of your form if you fancy having a toolbar down at the bottom. I think we'll leave it at the top for the moment, and we will just OK that. Now if we save that now and go back to our code, and if we have a look at the dialog creation code, we'll find that down at the bottom there is a new command in control add toolbar, which has added our toolbar, which is default to calling it IDC toolbar 1. And it's placed it at the top of the screen, which is where we've asked it to put it. So it's also put a sample toolbar function in place. So if we have a look at the sample toolbar function, and it's given us a template for how to actually put this in place, which is ideal. Now it's passing two parameters into this function, the handle to the dialog and the handle to the toolbar. Both things that this particular function is going to need to know. Now, what do we actually do then? Well, we need an image list. This image list is going to contain the graphics for our bitmaps, which are in fact the icons. Now, what it's doing here, although it's not obvious, is it's actually setting 4 values, which we will just document this. The first one is the depth of colour. Now I think we will step this one up slightly. We are going to create these variables and we're going to slot them in. So we'll create a new bunch of variables. The first one we're going to use is depth. This is for the how many colours are actually allowed. Now we're going to go up to 32. We want the width and height of our icon to be 32. And the final number is for the initial number of icons the image list is set up to support. So what we're doing then is we're creating a new image list with a depth of 32 bits for colours. Each icon will be 32 pixels wide, 32 high, and we're set up to support 6 icons. You can raise or lower that number as you need. And this passes over to this value here, which is our image list handle. And we're then going to use the image list handle to add each of the icons. Now this is the unique identifier of the icon. And then if we look back to our original definition of those, we have a build icon and a help icon. So if we nip to our sample toolbar, paste this in. The second one was a help icon. There we go, and we're not actually needing a third one here, so we'll just remove that line. And having done that, this final command sets the image list against the toolbar. It connects the two. So having done that, then we can then add the buttons to the toolbars. Now, what we're doing here is we're adding to this dialog, this toolbar on the dialog, and we're putting in this number. And this number is the number of the icon, the ordinal position of the icon in the image list. So that would add the build icon, since that's the first one we added. And number 2 would add the help icon, which is the second one. And there's a piece of text. If we fold this around so you can actually see this, there's a piece of text which follows, which is the text you have underneath the toolbar button on the toolbar. Now what we want is the first one to be the build report, and the second one we'll put to help. Now we haven't actually got any help yet, but if we did have any help, this is what the user would click on to actually get it. Now, the other number which appears in this constant, and we'll lose the third one because we're not using the third one, this constant in here is going to be the unique identifier in the event handler, or which event to kick off when the button is actually pressed. So what we'll do is we will call that one build, and we'll call that one help. Now these would have been created up at the top with all the other, there we go, so we'll call that build, and we'll call the next one help. And we didn't actually need the save one. So we've defined 2 constants which are going to be in the event handler. So what you can do is if we go to the event handler of the form and look down for the command. Now in here, this is where all the buttons generally are done, and the toolbar button is just another button. So put another case in, and the same logic as if you were pressing any other button on the screen. And all we'll do in here, just to test it, just tick a message box on the screen to say button pressed. So if we run this now, let's see if we've made any syntax errors. No, we haven't. Right, okay. Now there's our toolbar at the top. Now we only have the build report. For some reason we don't have the help one in. We'll check that in a moment. We need to actually move things around a wee bit because obviously our controls are slightly overlapping. What I think we'll do is we'll move this HTML control down just a tad. So we go back to where our dialog is set up. Now in here we did the prep HTML. Now this is where we set our X and Y coordinates. So we're starting at 10 along and 50 down. So I think we will start at 65 down. And we'll up that number to 75, 15 of a difference. And let's see if that gives us something that's more pleasing to the eye. Yes, that's about right. Okay, for some reason our help icon's not appearing, so let's figure out why the help icon is not appearing first before we press the button. So if we have a look at our code at the beginning, brings in two icons. Ah, there's a problem. Help icon is in 2001 and I'm referencing it as 2002. So we got our numbers slightly wrong there. So let's sort that out and try running it again. And there we go. We've got a build report and a help icon. We click on the help icon, nothing happens because we haven't put an event in the event handler. But if we click on build report, it pops up the button pressed. Now what we want to do basically is to replace this build a report button with our toolbar button. So what we can do, if we go back to our event handler and go down to here, now this is where the toolbar button is actually triggered, and further down we have the button build report, which is what happens when you click on the actual button. Now what you can do in here is we want them to do basically the same thing. And if we copy that, and the case statement is now going to do the same thing regardless of which button actually gets pressed, whether it's the actual button or the toolbar button, which means we can take this event out completely. So if we run that now, our application comes up on screen, and if we click the build report toolbar button, it populates our HTML. So effectively we don't need this build a report button. So one thing we can do, we may want to keep this for debug purposes for other things. So what we can do is leave it in the code, but in the initialization of the form we can actually hide it. Now we know that is the identifier of the actual button on the screen. If we copy that, go up to our initialization, and we can use a command to hide the button. Control hide the dialog we're dealing with, which in this case is this reserved one, our button in there. So control hide, handle to the dialog, handle to the button. If we run that now, we will find that by just putting that single line of code in, the button has now disappeared. Now you can use that logic in your code in several places. You can make things appear conditionally or unconditionally, so that every time a user clicks on a particular thing, then things appear on screen. So we could put logic in here: when you click on the build report toolbar button, the button would automatically appear or disappear. You'll find the commands for doing that underneath the control. There is a control hide function, which is the one we called, and there's also a control normalize function, which is the opposite, which effectively makes it visible. So what we've done today, we've created a toolbar on a form, we've added a couple of icons to it. One thing you may want to do in your creation of the toolbar is you may want to separate the icons on the toolbar. For example, you may want to keep the help slightly separate from everything else. So how do we actually do that? Well, the icons creation remains the same, but what you can do down here is you can actually put in a separator. and you can specify how many pixels separation you get between these two buttons. So if we run this now, what we get is a separator line between the two icons. So I hope you enjoyed this introduction to toolbars. Thank you for watching.